All right, go live, going live, and we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gravity Max live stream. Today, I am joined by my co-host, Sebastian. How are you this fine afternoon?
Doing pretty well. It was very hot outside. I had to mow my lawn, but it's all right. I enjoy mowing lawns. It's how you measure the true mettle of a man, and I feel that I did a very, very good job despite the 85-degree weather.
Nice. Nice job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I prefer to stay inside when it's hot like this.
Hmm.
But, yeah.
How hot is it over there?
Anyway, I don't know. Normal hot,
Normal.
but
Normal
that's
Sarasota
hot.
hot.
Let me see. Yeah, let me pull up the weather channel. The weather channel says 84 degrees.
Wow.
So, feels like 93 because it's super humid. So,
That's
there you
rough.
go.
I might not
Yeah.
mow in that weather. I'm gonna be honest.
Uh-huh. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Anyway, yeah, I have plenty of indoor activities to do, like homework. But, yeah, so let's just get started with the plugs. All right. Visit the Gravity Max website at gravitymaxmedia.com. Also follow Gravity Max on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Patreon. Links to all that stuff in the description below. Also, also follow Sebastian. I was gonna say also Sebastian follow. Like, all right.
Yoda.
Yoda. Yeah, exactly. Yoda
Right there.
speak. Also follow Sebastian on social media, Instagram and YouTube, 128 seconds. He makes quick educational videos that are the counterparts to these longer live streams. Links in the description below. And then my book, A Somewhat Odd Start, the third book in my sci-fi trilogy. If you want to read it, you can go to Amazon and get it. I think the link is also in the description for that. So that's all the plugs out of the way. Now we're going to talk about that dude with the hair,
That
that
individual.
guy that has the crazy hair,
It's what
and
he's
that's
most
how
well known for.
we'll identify him. Yeah,
Physically, anyways.
Albert Einstein. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Albert Einstein. We did a episode about relativity, and that is the theory that Einstein developed. So today we're going to talk about his personal life, like a biography.
Mm-hmm.
So
This is
yeah,
very similar to our episode on Isaac Newton. Um,
yep.
as, of course, he's another scientist, but we did a biography style episode on him, so if you want to check that out, go ahead. That's
Hmm.
the dude with the apple. Um, I really love these
Yep.
non-descriptive names for all these
Yeah, exactly.
episodes. They're the best.
Yep,
But
exactly. So
yeah, here we are with Einstein, probably the most
mhm.
revolutionary physicist of all time, but definitely the most revolutionary theoretical physicist. Um, has shaped science and science fiction as well. I'm sure if we looked at a lot of like the science fiction literature, there would be like a big shift after his theories were published and made public.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's kind of interesting. I don't know. In terms of like understanding of the like
Mm-hmm.
makeup of the universe, like for space stuff, I don't know how it was affected, but like around the time that he was, operating, like people still thought like, oh, the sun is hot just because it started out really hot and it's cooling off,
Mm-hmm.
where that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so, um, so it's sort of interesting. Like you get that's the time machine. H.G. Wells. He basically travels at the end of the book. He travels 30 million years in the future, and the sun is like cold, so Earth is just covered in snow and giant crab people, because of course
You
it's
gotta
all
love
crabs.
crab
So
people, but you gotta
yeah,
remember
yeah,
last episode I said if there were gonna be any aliens to invade us, oh boy, those crab people level 10 threat. Crab people, intergalactic crab people are the raid boss of aliens. They're just
Yep, exactly.
they're just evolutionarily superior to us in every way. Every single day I wake
Yeah.
up and I'm angry that I'm not a crab. I swear. There's the joke. I know the joke. I'm well aware the Sebastian the Crab joke. It's been there, but it's been
Oh,
done.
there's a joke.
Yeah, there's a joke. People be calling me
Oh,
Sebastian
yes.
the
Yeah, okay.
Crab, but
Like Disney.
yeah, I just all
Okay.
crabs are superior. Man, crabs don't have back issues. Crabs don't get kidney stones. That's all I'm talking about.
Yeah. I wonder what diseases crabs do get, because I have no idea.
Crabs.
That, hmm, yeah, that would be interesting. Anyway, Albert Einstein. So, let's get started with Albert Einstein's childhood.
Childhood. Everyone's got to start
So,
somewhere.
yeah, exactly. Albert Einstein was born in 1879 in a town called Ulm, ULM, in Germany. But at that point, this is like when there's a kind of a ton of different German kingdoms that are like all together. I don't know the full history of that, but specifically, he was in the kingdom of Württemberg.
Mm.
Württemberg, um, and so that is like southern Germany. We have a map actually. So here is the map, and this is about Einstein moving around a lot when he was a child. He moved from to many different cities. Uh, Basically, his family moved around a lot because of like troubles with the family business, essentially. So, yeah, Einstein was born in Ulm. He lived there for like a year. Then his family moved to Munich in order to start a like electronics store. Uh, his father and his uncle founded electronic. I don't even know. I'm not gonna pronounce it, but it was like an electronics company, like electrical equipment. But the problem was that they used direct current, and at this time there was sort of a battle between alternating current and direct current, and alternating current won. So that causes problems for the Einstein family. Um, and in the early 1890s, his father's company basically loses a contract bid to set up lights, I believe, in the city of Munich because of the fact that he was using direct current instead of alternating current. So then he moved to Milan and then Pavia, Italy. And that's a few years later. Einstein followed them to Pavia, Italy. Then they moved to Switzerland. So we'll get into all that and the specifics of that. So we start with Leutpold Gymnasium. And in this context, a gymnasium, it means like a preparatory school. So he wasn't just like working out, getting buff all day.
Albert Einstein
So
was
this is,
cracked at
yeah,
dodgeball.
exactly. Yeah, like exactly. Yeah, so in Europe, apparently, like you just call a preparatory school a gymnasium. Um, like, okay. uh, so so this place, Leutpold Gymnasium, which its name has been changed to Albert Einstein Gymnasium.
Mm.
So they're like, we got to get that credit for our alumnus. And so this is where he went to, primary school and secondary school, and this is in Munich. So yeah, so this is like the first few years. This is the beginning of his education, and yeah, he like. So people always say that Einstein like dropped out of school at the age of 11. I haven't seen that in the research, so I don't know where that myth comes from.
It might just be a
Have you
result
ever heard people say that?
of him like moving around, because
Yeah.
he moved when he was 11, right? Like if we look at the dates,
Hmm.
so perhaps
I think it
people
was closer. I don't know, but
I don't know. Perhaps people took that as him like quote unquote dropping out of school. Maybe because he moved, and specifically because this place was a gymnasium, like a preparatory school, that wasn't really a thing that people did. And
Yeah,
in
that might be
in the
something.
research, it says that he had some disdain for the teaching
Yeah,
methods. So
he did conflict with the teaching methods. That part is true that people like to say,
yeah.
because he said it was like sort of like stifling
Hmm.
to actually learning things, because it was more about rote memorization, and he did not like that. But as far as I can tell, he never dropped out. He continued to go to school through college, and then got a graduate degree. So he was in school for a long time. Uh, but yeah, so yeah, that's sort of his early school education in Munich. So, all right, next slide.
Hmm.
Einstein was a child prodigy. So,
Of course.
predictably, kind of, as you would imagine. Um, so Einstein had like a tutor, but eventually the tutor was like, he's just too smart for me, when he was like a teenager. And um, Einstein, so on his own, before like being exposed to it, he developed his own Pythagorean theorem, like his own proof for it, before anyone was like, "Oh, look at this! This is the Pythagorean theorem." So that's sort of interesting. Um, so then also he learned about differential calculus and uh, inte- integrals and stuff like that when he was just 14. So that's pretty impressive. Like, because those are difficult subjects. Um, and then also he got into the work of Immanuel Kant, the philosopher. I think we talked about him in our philosophy episode,
Yeah, we did.
about Immanuel Kant. So Kant's like ideas sort of reflect in Einstein's ideas, um, just his like life philosophy. So yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to add about Kant.
Just looking at him really quickly, Zach knows a lot about Kant, and again,
Hmm.
you can go back to the philosophy episode, and because he definitely came up. But apparently, one of Kant's big tenets of his philosophy is that it had a very large emphasis on freedom and liberty. He believes that if a person could not act otherwise, then his or her act can have no moral worth. So, big emphasis on choice, definitely an ethical philosopher, just based on that. So, differing from the more metaphysical ones that wonder at, oh, like why the universe is the way it is, if there is a God, stuff like that. Definitely much
Hmm.
more of an ethical one. He also comes up a lot in The Good Place, if you've seen that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which I actually haven't seen the fourth season too,
Yeah.
and I should do that. But um, I definitely prefer the ethical philosophers, and
Hmm.
it seems like Einstein did too, because there were a couple other philosophers that were credited as influences of his, and they were all pretty
Hmm.
ethical, pretty ethically focused, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah, if you watch the philosophy episode, we don't mean like, you know, they use sustainably sourced plastic. We mean that they studied ethics.
Yeah.
So they studied ethics versus studying metaphysics or axiology or something,
Mm-hmm.
or the other ones. So that's yes, that's what Sebastian's saying there. Um, yeah. So yeah, I think that sort of influences, because Einstein was very much a pacifist for like the majority of his life, and then even nearing the end of his life, he was like still a pacifist, but like a sort of like preparedness oriented pacifist. Like, I guess there's different ways to be a pacifist, and we'll get into that. But yeah, So, yeah. All right. So, next up. So Einstein, after going to school until like 15 or 16 years old, he moves to Pavia for a summer, and then the whole family moves to Switzerland, and he tries to get into the Swiss Federal Polytechnic School in Zurich when he's like 16, but his exams, he doesn't pass like the humanities part of the exam, so like history and literature parts, although he obviously, passes like physics and math with flying colors. So they say, okay, you're going to go to the Argovian Cantonal School for like 2 years so that you can get good at the other subjects. And so he does that. Uh, yeah, it's interesting. So the school is in Aarau, Switzerland, which is near Zurich. And so he lives with a professor at the school. And while he's living with the professor, he falls in love with the professor's daughter. And this will be a trend.
Yeah.
Einstein had many like love interests
He was a
throughout
romantic
his
guy.
life.
Certainly a
Yeah.
romantic guy. Yeah, and I find that very funny, personally.
Hmm.
Like, it
Yeah.
kind of sucks because he was most definitely having affairs with,
Mhm.
on both of his wives. But he, somehow between, coming up with the most revolutionary ideas in physics to date, he found time to court copious amounts of women.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is like a sort of interesting part of his story. Um, but yeah, once he, graduates. Oh, also while he's in Aarau, he gives up his Württemberg citizenship, so his like German citizenship. He what is it like rejects or whatever, renounces.
Yeah.
Yes, he renounced his citizenship, but then he will eventually reclaim it. And the reason he renounced his citizenship in Germany was to avoid military service. Um, so which makes sense because he was a pacifist. So yeah, and he's like, I'm living in Switzerland now. So yeah, then he so after the Argovian Cantonal School, he goes to the Federal Polytechnic School in Zurich as he wanted to before. And yeah, he just, he does well, as you can imagine, right, in physics. And he goes to this school under a teaching diploma program. So it's like you go to school and you get like a teaching degree too, which is still a thing now. Like, I imagine it's different from how they did it before in like, 1897, but there's like things that you can do. I was just reading about that because I have to read a lot about college stuff, and they have all those sort of different pathways that they talk about. So that's what he's doing. And in that course, there are only 5 other students, and one of them is his future wife, Mileva Marik. And so that at this school, he meets his future wife. So, yeah. So Mileva Marik, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. That's just how I'm going to pronounce it because I don't know. She was obviously smart as well because she went to this college, the same school. And it's interesting because Einstein later, he and like his friends, his like intellectual friends, they would start a club called like the Olympia Academy where they would just discuss. It's just like a discussion club, and Marik would join them. So, yeah. And there's ideas, some people theorize, although it's not why it's probably not true. I think it's generally considered false that like she helped contribute to the relativity theories.
Hmm.
But there isn't like that much evidence for it. Like most of the evidence is against that, but it's just interesting. So yeah. So Einstein graduates from the Federal Polytechnic School in the year 1900. So he gets the teaching diploma, which, after getting a teaching diploma, right, you would want to get a teaching job, but it does not it does not turn out well in that regard. Bad job market in the early 1900s Switzerland, I guess. So yeah. So we'll get into that. So early career. This is where Einstein first comes up with those big important ideas. So the patent office. This is where Albert Einstein worked. So he tries to find a teaching job for 2 years, but he does not find it. And so he doesn't get
So he does
the
some random stuff.
he doesn't find a teaching post.
It's
so
great,
he's just searching for a job, right? So in 1901 he becomes a Swiss citizen, and so then his friend, Marcel Grossman's father, I'm not sure the relation, but helped him get a job at the Bern patent office. So he goes to Bern and just works at the patent office because it's like, what else are you going to do? And it was not fun. He was bored. He didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
He was not amused. So he just evaluated patent applications, which, like, I don't know. I feel like that would be kind of interesting, but
I mean, yeah, to some degree, but he ended up working there for like 7 years, was it? Yeah, from
yes.
Yeah, like 1901, 1902-ish to like 1908, 1909-ish. But I mean, like, that is kind of mindless work to some degree, especially after 7 years. And like, you know how people always say you have like shower thoughts or stuff like that? It's because you're just like doing like mindless work. You're just there, just washing yourself. But I think that helped him to some degree. And there is also that point about how some of the patents that came in kind of turned his mind towards ideas and concepts that would play into general relativity. But I think that might also just be a big part of it. That he was at a job that he couldn't really care less about, that was more or less mindless, so his mind would wander. And that is, it's good. It's good to let your mind wander every now and then. You might just come up with the theory of relativity.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting because Einstein's father wanted him to be an engineer rather than a physicist, like when he was younger. And so this, like, the patent job is probably more closely related to engineering than physics, because you're evaluating patents. So, it's like probably hard to stay entertained when you are that smart as Albert Einstein, that your name literally becomes synonymous with intelligence. Probably hard not to be bored unless you're just like doing like precisely what you want to be doing. But nevertheless, he had plenty of time to just come up with different theories and scientific papers, and eventually he would start doing that. But let's talk about some more of his personal life, which is like interesting. So Albert Einstein, they only found this out in 1987 that Einstein had 3 kids instead of 2. So before he had his 2 sons, he had a daughter named Lyserl. And I don't think this picture here is a picture of Einstein and Mileva with Lyserl. I think it's with one of their other kids. So just disclaimer there. But Lyserl Einstein was their daughter. And it's sort of interesting. The reason that people don't know about her is that she was born before Einstein and Marie got married, like by a year or something. And so it was like an out of wedlock marriage, which is like, ooh, controversial. And so Marie took Lyserl to, I believe, Serbia, because she's from Serbia, and stayed there for about a year. And so now here's the question that people don't know the answer to is, did Lyserl die of scarlet fever, which is the prevailing theory, or was she adopted by one of Marie's friends? So it's kind of mystery. Ooh, historical mysteries unresolved. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. They only know this because of like a single letter that they found in 1987.
Yeah.
So pretty strange.
Lyserl was probably just hanging out with the Lindbergh baby.
Oh yeah, exactly.
All like the famous stolen children.
Club.
They form a breakfast
Yep.
club. That's a show idea. Tell me that's not a show idea. Just all the famous missing kids
exactly.
Just going on adventures.
All the famous.
Yeah.
Actually, there was a book series that's kind of like that. It's pretty weird. So I forgot what it's called, but it's like this book series where it's like time travel, and it's like famous historical kids that like die under mysterious circumstances are like abducted right before their death and then like adopted by people in the future, and it's weird.
Wow.
And it's like, but they don't actually know that they're like historical figures because of like, I forget the whole plot, but like anyway, they find out and then things happen. I like the book about the Romanov family. That was like the fourth one in the series. That was interesting, even though they sort of resolved that mystery, but I still,
that got.
I still like, yeah, but yeah. So anyway, so Lyserl Einstein, open mystery.
We need a BuzzFeed Unsolved.
BuzzFeed Unsolved, yeah, exactly. Because that would be interesting. Are there some missing descendants of Einstein out there? Are there people, like a couple people, that are like unbeknownst to them, the grandchildren or great-grandchildren of Albert Einstein?
I mean, Albert Einstein, he had all those romantic interests. It's not too far out of the question.
What? Yeah, not even Lyserl. If it was, that's interesting. Yeah. Who knows? Who knows? They should make that an option on like 23andMe. Just like, are you related to Albert Einstein or not? They could do that probably, because they have like Einstein's brain preserved in a jar or something like that. So like you could get the DNA. Anyway, I digress. Anyway, yeah. So Marie comes back to Bern, and they get married, and Einstein just works at the patent office and comes up with some interesting ideas. So, yeah. All right. Next, we get to 1905, Einstein's Annus Mirabilis, which is miracle year. So, this year in 1905, Einstein wrote 4 different papers in physics that were each on their own very important. So the first one, on a heuristic viewpoint concerning the production and transformation of light. This one is about the photoelectric effect, and Einstein basically explains it with the particle nature of light. And this is the whole quantum thing. Like, this is one of those, like, this is like a basic textbook example, the photoelectric effect that they talk about to like explain energy states of like electrons and stuff in chemistry class. Do you remember them talking about the photoelectric effect in chemistry class?
Yeah, to some degree. It was touched upon very lightly, and
Mm-hmm.
not even in my AP Chem class, actually. It was in my intro to Chem class, weirdly enough.
Mm.
But I'm sure I'll hear about that in Chem classes I take in college and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, it's not like that important to chemistry. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
is more a physics thing, but it's basically that when you shine a light on like a sheet of metal, nothing will happen. But then if you increase the energy level of the light, eventually it's like a flip switches and electrons start coming off of it. Um, and it's like if you keep increasing the energy, it increases like the either the number or the speed. I forget exactly how the photoelectric effect worked, but it basically that sort of stepwise pattern where it just starts with the metal just doing nothing at all, and then suddenly it spikes up and starts doing something, is a demonstration of quantum energy levels. Because if you could just flow between energy levels easily and you could be at any energy state, then what you would expect to see is as you increase the energy level of the light, you would expect to see like a couple electrons here and there start floating around and then more and more and more instead of a sudden snap. So Einstein here, this paper is sort of foundational to a lot of quantum physics, which is funny because he ends up not liking quantum physics. Which is just funny because that also happened with Schrodinger.
Mm-hmm.
He came up with a ton of quantum physics things and then didn't like quantum physics. It's like it's weird. It's like half the people involved in creating quantum physics are just like ended up being like, I hate this. What is this? Like, and that's just funny about quantum physics. Just like,
It's just it's so tough. All the randomness in it, and like
mm-hmm,
randomness in like with three asterisks because it may or may not be
mm,
random, but all the seemingly random stuff is disheartening. I can see how it'd be
mm-hmm,
disheartening. Like Einstein or Schrodinger is just hunched over their work, and they're like, "Yes, finally, I understand." And then like
mm,
three electrons start doing some weird, like synchronized
mm-hmm.
interpretive dance, and they're like,
Yep.
I'm done. I'm done here. Thanks, everyone." I can see how it'd be
Yeah.
very disheartening.
Yep. I like the first time I heard about like Schrodinger's story.
Mm-hmm.
I forget where, but like I remember the quote where they said he decided to go back to biology. And I'm just like, I just like that phrasing of it. Just like, he's like, I'm going back to biology, just like, which is like just funny. But anyway, so yeah, that gets into the like quantum nature of particles. And then the next paper that he writes is on the motion of small particles suspended in a stationary liquid as required by the molecular kinetic theory of heat. And this is about Brownian motion, which is the way that gases move. And so this basically provided further evidence to atomic theory, which was not 100% solidified at this point. Same with the particle nature of light, that wasn't 100% solidified either, and it would take until like the 1920s, uh, like 1910s, 1920s, before people were like, okay, light is a particle, but also a wave, because previously, what what we had seen of light was very wave-like, um, particularly that if you shine two beams of light at each other, they'll just go past each other, which is what a wave will do. Versus if they were particles, you would expect them to like crash and then like fall to the ground or something, which would be very strange to see. Um, and so that basically is things like that are why people thought light was a wave. And then same thing with atoms. People weren't 100% sure. It had proven to be useful thus far as like a way of thinking about particles, of thinking of things like that, but there hadn't been like evidence 100%. So Einstein helped provide that. Then we have the most famous, or well, actually, I'm not sure. All of these are pretty famous, but the last two I would say are more famous to Albert Einstein. Uh, on the electrodynamics of moving bodies, which is special relativity. And this is special relativity, but not general relativity. And the difference there being that special relativity is just about inertial reference frames. So that is no gravity. You are out in space, either at rest or moving at a constant velocity. So that is what special relativity was about. And so 1905, this is when Einstein came up with that. Then we get, does the inertia of a body depend upon its energy content? And that is E equals mc squared, the famous equation, most famous equation of all time, I would say. Energy matter equivalence, which is interesting because like that is also sort of the foundation of nuclear technology. And it's funny because Einstein, when it starts getting to the point that there's like nuclear technology, he thinks that it's just going to be used for like energy production, like nuclear power plants. He's like, oh, this is going to be great. We'll get to that story later though, because it's an interesting story. But yeah, so these are the Annus Mirabilis, and this is why he won the Nobel Prize too. Later, he's going to win the Nobel Prize. Yet they don't award him the prize for relativity, but for the photoelectric effect, which is kind of strange. And I think you can only win the Nobel Prize once, right? I guess in any given field. I'm not sure about that.
That's interesting. I don't know. I will look that up.
Yeah. What are the rules about winning Nobel Prizes? But yeah, so this is his Annus Mirabilis at the Bern Patent Office. So,
it looks like you can actually win them more than
multiple
once,
times?
but the only one that really has is the International Committee of the Red Cross as a whole, because they have received 3 Nobel Peace Prizes. So
that makes sense because theoretically you could say that the members of the organization change.
That's what I was thinking.
Over time. So it's like, so I guess an individual person though can't win it multiple times.
Yeah.
That would make sense.
And he won the prize. Albert Einstein won the prize in physics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yep.
Yeah, 1905. He just popped off. That was his year.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just
that's
sometimes you have a good year. Like I bet he went around just like repping that year for like a while. He's like, man, you should have seen me in 1905. I was on fire.
Yeah.
Like to everyone. It was like,
yeah, exactly.
Annus Mirabilis, my guy. Annus Mirabilis.
Yep.
Which is not what Einstein sounds like at all. He has a very calming voice, actually.
Yeah.
Max and I listened.
And obviously a German accent.
Yeah. We listened to part of his speech. He has a very, very heavy German accent, but he has a very like deep and calming voice. I like it.
So Einstein worked at the patent office. Then he got a graduate degree. And in 1908, he was recognized as an important scientist, and it was Alfred Kleiner appointed him to be a lecturer at the University of Bern. So that is this next slide here, professorship at the University of Bern. They created like a new position for him, the position of theoretical physics that they didn't have before. And so that's just pretty cool. So he works here. Step up from the patent office. He finally got that teaching post at a college. So yeah.
And at this point, he's pretty prominent. I wouldn't say he's world famous though.
Mm-hmm.
He is, So he got appointed in 1909 for the professorship.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So but he was still a very respected scientist, which is why they made the position
Yeah.
and all that. But certainly
Yeah,
not world
well known
famous.
among scientists, but not necessarily world famous. Yeah, like how many leading scientists can you name? It's like that's difficult. Because there's a lot of people that are like science educators, but then I'm like, how? Like Bill Nye. Like I don't think he's at the forefront of science.
Yeah, no.
Right? It's more just he's just like he makes the science education. So that's different. But then I'm not sure about Neil deGrasse Tyson because I think he does do like astronomy work. So because Carl Sagan was kind of like that, where he was. So it's kind of interesting there, but I'd say a leading physicist is Michio Kaku.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, so that kind of thing. So he wasn't like super famous at this point, but well respected. So he worked at University of Bern, but then he worked at a ton of different universities over the years. You know, just moving around Central Europe. He lived in Prague, Austria, and taught there, and Berlin in the Prussian Academy of Sciences. So he just worked at all these different, then like Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physics, just all these different places throughout the years. So that's what he does. So he finally becomes a professor, which is, you know, what he wanted in the first place, essentially. Worked his way up from patent office to clerk to professor. But yeah. So next we get general relativity, which took him multiple years to sort of puzzle out. And one of the big parts of general relativity that sort of allowed him to start going at the problem was the concept of like equivalence between gravity and acceleration. And this he started thinking about in 1907. So this equivalence principle, you've probably heard it before, and yeah, it's attributed to Einstein, is that if you are in, you know, like an elevator, essentially, like an elevator, what do you call the like cab, elevator, car? I don't know,
Yeah,
but
I know, like,
the box,
the box,
the box part that you're in an elevator, and it's just like sitting on the ground. So it's not in an elevator shaft. It's just like, but the important part is that there's no windows. So you're just in this box, right? And it's just sitting on the ground on Earth. So in that situation, you would not be able to tell the difference between that and being in deep space accelerating upward at 9.8 meters per second squared. There is no experiment you could do within that box that could prove one way or another, in a meaningful way, of course, because like if the box isn't sealed, then like you can tell that like air moves in or out, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about scientific experiments. So if you shine a light in a box that is accelerating upward, the light will actually bend down a little bit from your perspective, and it's not actually bending, it's still just going in a straight line, but because of acceleration, it causes you to move upward relative to the beam of light. That's how Einstein thought, oh, so gravity must also be able to bend light, which is interesting because that is how we confirmed relativity eventually. But that is one of the major parts of relativity, is that light can be bent by gravity. And then, of course, the second part of the equivalence principle is the part of if you are in space far from any gravitational objects versus you are on Earth free falling, there is also no difference. And this is another important idea because, like, part of the equivalence principle is that Einstein basically says falling, like free falling, is an inertial reference frame, whereas in Newtonian physics, the only inertial reference frames are stationary and moving at a constant velocity. But according to general relativity and the equivalence principle, a valid inertial reference frame is falling according to the forces of gravity without any other forces acting on you. And so it's really interesting. This is where you get into the curvature of the universe and the fact that under relativity, gravity isn't actually a force. It's just that the warped shape of the universe means that traveling downward at 9.8 meters per second is the inertial frame. And so sitting on this chair right now is actually me accelerating upward at 9.8 meters per second. So it's actually the force of the chair pushing me upward rather than a balance of the force of the chair and the force of gravity, because like there is no force of gravity. So it's that sort of thing. Very interesting. And that is eventually what Einstein will publish in 1915. So he works on this for quite a few years.
Yeah, so this is his most famous theory, and this is what pushed him across the, I guess, the boundary of world fame after some of his ideas that he presented in his theory were confirmed during the solar eclipse in 1919.
Yep.
And that was like, everyone was like, all right, Albert Einstein, he's a genius, and he got recognized for all of that.
Yep.
And,
yeah,
you know, very, very well deserved. Like, it's not one of these cases where, like, someone gets very, very famous, but they didn't do the brunt of the work. Like, the one that comes to my mind is Thomas Edison, of course. Not to say that he didn't do any work, but he kind of just ripped off Nikola Tesla, who did do the brunt of the work, and Edison took all the fame and was also just a horrible person. Like, honestly, I have mad beef with Thomas Edison.
Mad beef with Edison. Wait, what did he do?
So he had such an ego problem that he would, like, he stole all of Tesla's stuff. Like, but that wasn't isolated to just Tesla. He did that stuff to other things as well. In fact, he tried to copyright all film. Just all film.
Absolutely.
And he like wrecked a couple sets because he was like trying to prove his point. He hired guys to like bust up a couple of movie sets and things like that. He was a horrible guy, really.
Imagine if all movies today were like owned by the Edison Corporation, which still exists.
Oof.
And you had to pay royalties to make a movie. That would be interesting.
Well, thank God.
Except actually, I don't think that would. Yeah. I don't think that would apply anymore because we don't actually use film. So at least there's that.
That's true.
Now we use digital, so that would be how you get out of that trap. But
yeah, but you know, at least
that's crazy.
At least all movies today aren't owned by a single company. But yeah, man. But Einstein, not the case. It wasn't like he ripped someone else off. It wasn't he stole someone else's idea. It wasn't someone else actually got to it first, but just wasn't as well known. That's like Alexander Graham Bell, I guess. But no, this it was him. It was him. It was completely his original ideas. To even be able to comprehend what he is putting down in these theories is a step in and of itself, because when you journey into like theoretical physics, you have to do more than just be able to visualize something. You have to be able to understand it to such a deep degree, which is why I'm so happy that he became a professor. Because I mean, first of all, that's what he wanted to do. And dude ended up working at a patent office for 7 years while he was waiting for the chance to become a professor. But he finally did, but I find it very hard to believe that anyone walked out of his class without at least one life-changing thing, you know? Because what makes someone a genius isn't what they think, it's the way they go about thinking. And it was the way that Einstein went about thinking that led him to the most revolutionary theory in physics of all time. It was his thought process that led him to it. It wasn't just that, he like just had the answer. Like, he looked at a couple of equations and he just had the answer. It was the path he took to get there. And I really hope that that is what he taught in his classes. If he taught not what to think, but how to think, which seemed to be his issue with his previous schooling, all the way back in the gymnasium.
Yeah.
If he taught in that manner, of teaching, like, ways to get to the solution, then, that's a major benefit to all of his students.
Yep, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, back to the personal side of things. Einstein, he was two-time environment. So he started to have marriage troubles. So he had two sons with Marie in 1904 and 1910. Yeah. And so they moved to Berlin in 1914, but very quickly Marie moved back to Zurich because she found out that Einstein was no longer like interested in her, even though they were married. So, yeah, that's got to be disappointing. And then 5 years later, they get divorced in 1919. And I don't know if this is true, but I found it on some fact website. So, but they say, as part of his divorce settlement, Albert Einstein agreed to give the money from his Nobel Prize to his ex-wife 2 years before being awarded the prize. I like that fact. Like, that's a
funny.
Good confidence. Yeah, like, that's funny. He was confident that he would win the Nobel Prize. So, like, that's funny. But yeah, so Einstein fell in love with Elsa Lowenthal, who we will talk about later. But kind of interesting that basically Elsa Lowenthal was his cousin. So yeah. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail.
Some scientists, it seems.
Yeah, didn't Charles Darwin marry his cousin or something?
Yep.
Yeah, because I saw this meme where it was like, genetic diversity is important for a species to survive. Mary's cousin. Like,
he was just trying to test a theory. Dude was like, let's find out. He's like, today I'm gonna do an experiment. And he had like 10 kids with his cousin, and like 4 of them died, and the other 6 were like just not okay. From here, Charles Darwin.
Wow.
Children. Yeah, so he had 10 kids. Let's see. Yeah. A lot of them just died of sickness. One of them did actually live to the age of 84 and became her father's editor and her mother's biographer. One of them became a scholar of mathematics and astronomy and became a protege of Lord Kelvin.
Oh, interesting.
One of them was okay. One of them got a medical degree. Okay. One of them went into the army. One of them founded the Cambridge Scientific Instrument Company. And one of them had Down syndrome and died of scarlet fever. So, really rolling the odds. So that was like, what, 4? Yeah, like 4 of them died of disease there. But, yeah, so probably not best to do scientific trials with your kids. But
I don't think he was doing a scientific trial. I think he was just ignoring.
It probably wasn't. But, like, it might have been in the back of his head. He was like, I wonder...
Yeah.
I wonder
Is this the best idea?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Why not?
Yeah.
Hey, honey, fifth time's the charm, right?
Oh no. Yeah, exactly. Um, but yeah. So so marriage troubles. Next, we get to World War One. So Einstein is a pacifist, right? And
Hmm.
so he signs this letter. Let me find where this is. It's called the Manifesto to the Europeans, which is a response to this other letter signed called the Manifesto of the 93, which was signed by a ton of German intellectuals, basically being like, yes, this is a good idea to go to war, World War One, and like justifying German militarism. Now this is World War One, so it's like it's not the Nazis, so it's kind of the sides are less clear in terms of who was morally correct in World War One. But yeah, World War One was just kind of like I still don't get the point. But anyway, it was just like it just made everyone depressed. That's basically what it did.
There
You
was,
know, it created the lost generation.
yeah, there was that part of it that was like wars before World War One were like so different that
Mm,
it was almost to the point where a country would go to war to increase morale for that country because they didn't
yeah.
care, like because it never got that big, right? So
Mm.
I think it
Yeah,
was just,
Russo-Japanese War
yeah,
immediately comes to mind.
exactly,
1905, the Tsar was like, "Oh, if we defeat Japan, everyone will be happy with us." Then they
exactly.
lost to Japan, and so then a ton of peasants revolted, and then the guards shot at them, and
Yeah,
then
and
communism.
then Teddy
So,
Roosevelt showed up, and he
yep,
won the Nobel Peace Prize.
yep,
But
yep. So,
um, yeah, no,
yeah,
so like
wars were like smaller scale.
it was just so different. It was just seen as so different. So like, I mean, and it's often said like World War One was fought with like really old strategy, but with new
Yeah,
technology, which made it horrible. Because when you
yep.
have horse drawn like cavalry on the battlefield alongside what would later become tanks, it's just a recipe for
Mm,
disaster. And that's just on a single battlefield, um, you know, like perspective. If you look at it from how the different countries joined the war, that gets even messier because it was Serbia and then it was Austria-Hungary, or I mean, it was
mm,
Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia, and then
yeah,
Russia steps in, and then here's Germany, and then there goes Italy, and then Britain's here, and then all that stuff.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's so crazy because it's like Britain's like, I'll stay out of this, just don't invade Belgium. And then Germany's like, I'm gonna invade Belgium like a boss.
And it must have
But
been from
yeah,
from Einstein's perspective, like, and you also got to think about it
hmm
because Einstein's from Germany, one of the most
mm,
key countries in World War One, the most key country in World War Two, and he's from there. He's a pacifist, and he sees World War One, and the entire world is shocked by it, but he doesn't even know that what he has created and the
mm.
process that he set in motion from his theories would be what would end World War Two.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah, it
very
is really
interesting.
interesting. I like this line from this manifesto to the Europeans. The struggle raging today will likely produce no victor. It will leave probably only the vanquished,
Yeah. Oh, and
which is
then
like kind of true.
there's that
Eh,
Einstein quote,
yeah.
right? About he says
Oh yeah, I know not what
exactly.
weapons
Yeah.
World War III will be fought with, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's because of the nukes. But yeah, so even in World War One,
Yeah.
just the level of technology in World War One, no nukes, just like Maxim guns and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Einstein's like, yeah, this is too much. This is just not going to end well for anybody. Um, and so he signs this. letter basically appealing to all of Europe, saying, guys, can we please just settle this peacefully? And the Europeans were like, no, we shall not.
If only.
But yeah, if only. It's also interesting, though. Another interesting thing that happened during World War One was this scientist Karl Schwarzschild.
Mm.
He was so his role. He was on the battlefront, and he was calculating the trajectory of artillery, and he had heard of Einstein's theories, and so while he was on the battlefront, he came up with a solution to Einstein's theories of relativity, which is that of a black hole. And so that's why we call it Schwarzschild radius, as the radius at which a black hole forms from a certain amount of mass. So that's pretty interesting. He died like in 1916, Karl Schwarzschild, from getting sick. So probably from the war. But yeah. So interesting sort of things that are going on. But obviously Einstein, pacifist, and he's in Switzerland, so he's able to stay out of it. Well, actually, I'm not sure he's still in Switzerland at this point, but he stays out of it. He's like, I'm not into this. No. But yeah, his spiritual home is Switzerland, truly, I must say. You know what I mean? So, yeah, Switzerland did not get involved. But yeah, but after World War One is over, then this is when Einstein finally breaks into his fame as a very smart science person. So the reason that this happened is that there's solar eclipse on May 29th, 1919, which went over South America and the Atlantic and then Africa. And a scientist, Arthur Eddington, went down to see the eclipse and measure the positions of stars close to the sun once it got dark out. And what that provided him the evidence for is he saw these stars were all bent. They were all in a different position than they should have been. All of these stars were like closer to the sun than they should have been, and like in a lensing way. So it's the gravitational lensing, the bending that Einstein described in general relativity. So this was basically confirmation of general relativity, that light could bend along its path. And so that revelation is basically, I mean, it confirmed Einstein's theories, which made him world famous. And so here we have some headlines. A new physics based on Einstein. Sir Oliver Lodge says it will prevail, and mathematicians will have a terrible time. That's funny. Space of 4 dimensions, in which gravity ceases to be a force and becomes a quality. So yeah, that's attempt to measure it. Its radius put at 16. This is about the universe, the size of the universe. Its radius put at 16 million light years, or 80 times the distance to the farthest known star cluster. These different headlines. And then, of course, we have on the right, we have Revolution in Science, New Theory of the Universe, Newtonian Ideas Overthrown, which I think is a very good headline. It's quick and simple. I like that. But yeah, this is worldwide. As you can see on the left here, this is the New York Times. This is November 1919. So Einstein, world famous, getting published in major newspapers and all around the globe. So this will sort of change his career from just like, important professor to like world celebrity, yeah.
Well deserved. Well deserved,
Yep.
sir. I mean, really. Like we were making this joke before we got on while we were doing research, but if you go to Albert Einstein's Wikipedia page, it says that under the category of people he has influenced,
Oh
it
yeah.
just says virtually all modern physicists.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because so it says influences and then influenced. And so like influences, it has a list of names, and then influenced, it's just like that's
Mm.
going to take too long. Virtually all modern physicists. So, yeah, that is, I mean, it says it all pretty much. So, that's funny. Um
No one had ever done it as good as him, and I would argue that no one has
hmm,
ever done it as good as him.
hmm,
Like, obviously, people have become masters in different uh,
hmm,
areas and realms and stuff, but I still find it very interesting that Albert Einstein, the creator of general relativity, of the theory of general relativity, is still like the master of the theory of general relativity, if you
hmm.
think about it. Because,
Yeah.
like, the ideas that Newton put forth would eventually be, revised, changed. The basic principles would still stay, of course, but they were improved upon by people that came after him. So
Hmm,
it's pretty rare in science that the person that creates a theory will become like the 100% over encompassing master of it. Even take Charles Darwin,
yeah.
evolution. He didn't understand DNA, just like we were talking about, or he
Hmm,
didn't understand like other specifics about genes, all that kind of stuff. And later on, like the guy with was it the beans? What was that guy's name?
yes. That dude with the beans,
You know what I mean?
Gregor Mendel.
Yeah, Mendel. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mendel's beans, and all that kind of stuff. So it really speaks to how smart of a guy he was
Hmm.
to be
Yeah.
still like the best at what he did,
Hmm.
even though he began it.
I'd say if string theory had panned out, which like
Mm-hmm.
now it's not as popular,
Yeah, no.
I would say the person who discovered it, like whoever would have like made a solid string theory that we could prove was true, they probably would have become the next Einstein.
Absolutely. I remember the hype
But
from
yeah,
that. Like all the hype
yeah.
around that.
Now people are like, yeah, string theory's dead. I mean,
It
not
died with
entirely,
Stephen
but
Hawking. It really
yeah,
died with Stephen Hawking. Like that was because
yeah.
Stephen Hawking was one out of maybe two, 3 dozen people on the entire planet that actually understood the math
Mm,
behind string theory.
yeah,
And he
yeah.
didn't even like it. Like he understood it, and like there were some aspects of it he flat out said he didn't believe in M theory,
Mm,
which is basically string theory on steroids. It requires like
hmm,
36 dimensions, and everything is insane. But he
hmm,
he really wasn't like before he died. He was still doing research into string theory and all that stuff, but he had kind of shifted his focus away from it. And then,
hmm.
you know, when you have one of like 36 people on the planet that actually understand something saying that, this might not be it, we all kind of have to take his word
Yeah.
for it, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, exactly.
But
Yep.
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, so Einstein, famous.
Yeah.
Next, we've got Elsa Lowenthal. So, yeah, this is the description. All right. They were not just cousins, but like double cousins.
Mm-hmm.
So, what that means is that on Einstein's mother's side, Lowenthal was his first cousin, and on his father's side, she was his second cousin. So, like, that's just like twice. Like, that's kind of crazy. Um, but again, like, I guess it's like only in recent history that people are actually concerned about that. I mean, look at the Habsburgs,
Oh,
right? Like, it was just kind of like normal, which is strange. But
I think the
yeah,
Habsburgs were still a little extreme, like even for the
yeah,
time.
people, yeah, people were like, yeah, that's too far.
Yeah,
But Charles Darwin, Albert Einstein, it was like not entirely strange. I mean, that's why there's like the blue people in Kentucky,
yeah,
like with the blood
yep,
disorder. They say that was because of
yeah, it
uh,
was.
incest. So yeah, um, but they didn't have kids, Einstein and Lowenthal. So that did not come into play. So yeah, because Marik was Serbian, so that's like the children were incest free, which is like good, I guess,
Mhm.
but it's just like kind of weird. Uh, anyway, so they got married. Yeah, even though they got
They got
married,
married.
Einstein was still in interested in other women. Um, yeah, it's funny.
Give him the
Here they
list.
have,
Give him the list.
yeah, exactly. So they have, uh, so they described 6 women that Einstein was interested in during his marriage with Lowenthal, which included, and I'm not going to read their names. Instead, I'm going to read the parentheticals next to their name because it's funny and it sounds like it could be like a bad rom-com or something like that. All right. So Einstein was interested in a blonde Austrian, the rich owner of a florist business, a wealthy Jewish widow, and a Berlin socialite. It's like those 4 descriptions walk into a bar. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
for real.
it's the setup to a joke. It's like a blonde Austrian, a rich owner of a florist business, a wealthy Jewish widow, and a Berlin socialite walk into a bar. Like that's just funny. But yeah.
And then,
Also,
yeah.
he briefly had a relationship with a Russian spy.
That's so
So,
funny. And like I think it
like,
was
yeah.
I think my air conditioner's gonna come down. But
Oh,
I think just read, and I always get these 3 people confused. I always get Bob Dylan,
mhm.
Elton John, and who's the other guy that I always get confused with them? Bob Dylan, Elton John, and Billy Joel. I always get those 3 guys confused. I don't know why. It was one of them. I want to say it was Elton John that also had a relationship with a Russian spy who was sent to spy on Elton John. It was like this insane story. It might have been Bob Dylan or Billy. I'm pretty sure it was Elton John, but check that out.
Interesting.
Just it's an interesting
Huh.
story. From the little I've heard, it sounds like a very interesting story.
Yeah, that is interesting. Um, so
But yeah, Einstein, man,
yeah,
he
that's
he
yeah,
he played the field. He knew,
mm, definitely.
like, I mean, his pickup lines must have been golden, right? Must have been like,
just like
yeah,
just like relativity pickup lines, just
exactly.
like from my perspective, like blah blah blah. I
Yeah,
can't think of
yeah,
one,
no, I
but
know exactly what you're saying. It would just be the best because,
yeah.
oh my god. Like at that point, like
Anyway,
when you're married to like the smartest guy ever, like
mm,
how does, like, I mean, Elsa must have just been peachy, just throwing all the like tax work and everything at it. Like anytime she needed a number, she's just like, "Hey, what's
yeah,
600, you know, thousand times 17.89?"
yeah,
And he's like, "Oh, clearly." And she's like, "Ah, of course."
obviously, yeah.
You know.
Yep.
But yeah,
Yeah,
must
exactly.
have been funny. But anyways.
Yep. So now we get to travels. So first, 1922, Einstein gets the 1921 Nobel Prize. I don't know why it took place in different years, but yeah, he gets the Nobel Prize in physics for his photoelectric stuff. So not relativity, which is strange. But again, it's like still like it's like even though they started to get some proof for his theories, they were still like in dispute because it takes quite a while to build all the evidence that you need for a theory, especially one that's like ahead of its time because it takes a lot of like you need to develop a new technology sometimes to even confirm it, right? But yeah, he gets the Nobel Prize and he starts traveling. He visits America a couple times in the 1920s, and he does guest lectures at like Columbia and Princeton, and he goes to the White House. You know, he's just having a grand old time in America. And yeah, then he visits Asia, and so America and Asia, they have like essays or something where he wrote about America and then Asia too. So he has my first impression of the USA, which is, I kind of want to read it, but yeah. So he just goes around, world tour, guest professor at different colleges. That's kind
That's
of
got
like,
to be insane. Like, imagine you walk in late to one of your classes and goddamn Albert Einstein is in the
Yep.
front being like, and as you can clearly see, and then you're like, oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
exactly.
Professor, I came in late.
Yeah, exactly. That would be like, how do you even, there's nothing you can say to like recover from that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like why were you late? Well,
Well, from my
like what can you
perspective,
say? Oh, yes. Yeah, well,
isn't that
relatively speaking.
in like oh, what is it? Into the Spider-Verse, the Miles Morales movie. Miles shows up late to class and he's like, the teacher's like, "Why are you late?" And he's like, "Well, Einstein said time is relative." What if you said that to Einstein?
Yeah,
He's like, "I
that would
know."
be,
And that's BS. Sit down.
yeah. Sit down. Yep. Yeah. So interesting. Um, but yeah. So he also participated in a committee for the League of Nations in Geneva with some other scientists, including Mary Curie and Hendrik Lorentz. So that's interesting because these are also notable figures. Lorentz is known for the Lorentz transformation, which is part of relativity, and Lorentz was formerly Einstein's physics professor. And then, of course, Mary Curie, you know, discoverer of radioactivity. And I would also say first victim of radioactivity, too. But yeah, so
That's a good point,
that's
actually.
it.
Yeah.
We got to do a Mary Curie episode,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
yeah, because like yeah, it did not end well when you work with radiation for your whole life. Let me tell you.
I never thought of that
But
that way.
yeah,
She must have been one of the first deaths of because you don't die of
mm.
just like radioactive
Yeah,
in your
exactly.
natural life.
Just like walking around Earth, exactly. Like, yeah, I don't think.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never realized
Yeah,
that.
because like the nuclear material that we source for labs and like for power plants and bombs and stuff, I mean, it obviously comes from somewhere on Earth because it has to, right? But like it's just spread out across the planet and so diluted in its natural state that just like the ambient radiation around us is like not going to kill you. It's only when you like concentrate it and get a bunch of it all in one spot that like you're going to start having negative effects. So it is pretty interesting. I bet Marie Curie was actually the first victim of radiation death, unless there was some other scientist before. Maybe the other guy, what was his name, that she worked with
Oh.
on all the radiation stuff. If he died first, then he would be
like
the first victim of
her
radiation.
husband.
Yeah.
That was Pierre, but
Yeah, Pierre.
Pierre had like, he had like mental issues because of the radiation, and because of that, he would often get like confused, like as if he had dementia. So he wandered out into the street and got hit by like a really heavy horse carriage that just kind of took him out.
Okay.
So,
yeah, he died in 1906, so
kind of
he is
radiation.
the first victim.
Yeah.
He's the first radiation victim. But, man, just brutal.
Yeah, horrible.
Let's see, death. Pierre Curie died in a street accident in Paris on 19 April 1906, crossing the busy Rue Dauphine. He slipped and fell under a heavy horse-drawn cart.
Yeah.
Man. Oof. Wow.
Yeah. Pretty intense, but God, radiation's got to be one of the worst ways to go.
Yeah. Radiation. Because it's such a strange thing. It's just so it's an entirely unfamiliar and like unnatural thing to humans, basically, because it doesn't exist in high concentrations until we made it exist in high concentrations. So it's like any death from space, like dying from like depressurization or something, completely unfamiliar to the human experience. Same thing with radiation. So yeah, spooky and haunting, but yeah. So world tour. So next. Einstein
that Cali lifestyle.
Visited California quite a few times, gave some lectures at Caltech, which is a school in California. And he made friends with like other famous people in California. Here in this picture he's with Charlie Chaplin. So that's pretty cool. He also befriended Upton Sinclair, author of The Jungle, that book about Chicago. So that I read. So I don't know if you guys know Upton Sinclair, but yeah. So interesting characters that he's meeting. He's meeting all these different people. Like, pretty cool.
I always find it interesting, historical figures meeting each other.
Yeah, definitely.
I think the weirdest...
And like from different fields too.
Exactly, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Like the weirdest one that I've ever heard that I covered in my Stalin video, or my Stalin versus Trotsky video, is Leon Trotsky meeting Frida Kahlo. It's like it's like really strange because he was hiding in Mexico. And that's where Frida Kahlo was, of course, and they met up, and I like, what did they say to each other?
Yeah, exactly. It also makes me wonder, what does a Russian accent sound like in Spanish?
That's a good point.
Like, what is it like? Accents in other languages have to be interesting.
Yeah.
Just like what does like, that's just so weird. And then, like, what does an English accent sound like in other languages, too?
Yeah.
Like, anyway. But yeah. So yeah. So this is where we transition into, like, World War II territory. So, on a visit to the U.S. in 1933, Einstein, so he's just visiting, like he visits multiple times. But while he was in America, Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany in 1933. And so he's like, oh, well, I cannot go back to Germany now. So that's like, that's just like,
he was also
that's just crazy.
he was also
Yeah.
Jewish.
Yeah.
I don't know if we said that, but yeah, he was Ashkenazi Jew.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's basically just like all of Eastern Europe,
yeah, exactly.
as opposed to like Israeli. So.
I don't know too much about his actual like beliefs. I do think he believed in God. I think he's made a bunch of statements on that he did believe in a God, but
yeah, I think they said he was agnostic, or they said secular.
Yeah,
was the
like
word they used.
exactly. So he wasn't fully in like I wouldn't say he practiced Judaism, but he definitely was leaning towards monotheism versus like any form of atheism.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, but yeah, so Einstein like briefly became a refugee. So he was in America. He went back to Europe, but not Germany. He went to, I think it was Belgium, and he stayed in Belgium for like to like see what was going on, try to sort things out. And so then eventually he went to Britain and tried to. Oh well, so he gave up he again renounced his German citizenship, and so then he went to Britain and he tried to get like accepted as a British citizen. But whatever was going on, they like were like no. So then he goes to America instead, and they're like, yeah, sure, you can stay here. So the series of events, he moves to Princeton, New Jersey, and becomes a professor at Princeton College. So, yeah. So yeah, it's pretty crazy because like as the Nazis came to power, they were like, "Oh, all of Einstein's theories are incorrect," and they were like, in the book burnings, they would burn his books, which is like, it's so crazy how the Nazis and also Stalin did this too, is that they would just end up being like complete idiots about scientific things because of like personal vendettas against people and like the ideology. Like one big example I can think of is Stalin did not believe in evolution, which is just strange.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Stalin did not believe in natural selection. Instead, he believed in like, it was this other theory that's like about stress, where it's like, basically it's that if you want to make crops that are resistant to the cold, what you got to do is when they're seeds, you got to soak them in like ice cold water so that they're used to the cold when they grow up, which like doesn't really make sense. But yeah, that's like, and that caused famines, by not being like, oh, okay, evolution. Because if they had thought about selective breeding, then they could have gotten better crops. And so it's the same thing here, is that when these authoritarian regimes take over, just because of the nature of like their ideologies and like just having to hold on to power, they end up like making very dumb scientific decisions. So yeah. But yeah, so Einstein comes to America.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Also, again, very weird to think that that the creation of a pacifist would be used to create both the biggest weapon, in history, but also to end a war. So pacifism was achieved in some regard, but it's a shift from like no conflict
and like MAD, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
For the Cold War.
Absolutely. literally a shift from no conflict to mutually assured destruction and all that.
Mm.
But it's really weird to think about it
Mm-hmm.
because humans and humanity here's society. Humans have the potential to turn anything into a weapon. There isn't a single thing that cannot be turned into a weapon.
Yeah.
Other than like,
Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah, all
I
tools
can't
are
think of
also
anything.
weapons.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I would say. Every tool is also a weapon. Like, it's even something as innocuous. Like, I was trying to think, like, oh, okay, but how about like oxygen? And I'm like, well, that can be used as an incendiary device. Like, oxygen can be used to like create huge flames. And then I'm like, okay, how about nitrogen? Well, that can be used to suffocate someone.
Yep.
So, literally everything can be a weapon. Like, it's just ridiculous. Maybe a feather, but
I'm very
I don't
ticklish.
know. Someone's gonna come at me with like
You tickle me, I'll
with
freak out.
like yeah, like some poisonous bird or something somehow is like, oh, the feather kills you. So yeah, everything can be a weapon.
Yeah.
But um but yeah, it is pretty interesting. Um so yeah, so Einstein moves to America, moves to Princeton, uh, becomes a Princeton professor at the Institute for Advanced Study.
Oh.
Um,
He looks so wholesome in that hat. I don't know why.
oh yeah,
But
yeah. So yeah, just continues to be a professor. He worked with John von Neumann. Von Neumann is known for the von Neumann probe concept, which is basically a space probe that is automated, so it's an AI, and the instructions are basically you send it to another star with the instructions to find a planet, land on the planet, make 10 copies of yourself, and send those to 10 other star systems. And that thought experiment is like you could colonize the galaxy with these von Neumann probes in like a million years, which is the blink of an eye on a cosmic time scale. And so then it's like is sort of a contributor to the Fermi paradox. Like, where are all the aliens? And so then he also worked with Kurt Gödel. So they all, talked about science and stuff. And yeah, one of the things that Einstein was working on was a unified field theory. So that's on the next slide. And I want to say disclaimer here. Einstein was not working specifically on string theory, but string theory is an example of a unified field theory. So a unified field theory basically reconciles relativity and quantum mechanics. So Einstein was like, my first invention, right? My first discovery, relativity, it was pretty good, but it can't describe everything. I need something that describes everything. And that's unified field theory. So he kept working on that. But it proved to be fruitless, unfortunately, which is kind of concerning because, like, we're still trying to find a unified field theory. And I'm like, if Einstein couldn't figure it out, what chance do we have of figuring out a unified field theory? Like, I mean, we'll see, but maybe with better technology, that'll be the advantage. But that was how Einstein spent most of his time.
yeah.
So next we get to atomic research. So Einstein himself didn't participate in atomic research, but basically this group of Hungarian scientists approached him and asked him to sign a letter to President Roosevelt, encouraging Roosevelt to start a Manhattan Project nuclear program. And the reason for that was because they said that the Germans were building an atomic bomb. We're, starting to research that. We're starting to try to build that. And obviously, if the Germans had an atomic bomb in any circumstance, it would not be a good situation in World War II, because even if, just like at all, if they got one, I mean, the whole point here was that America would get one before the Germans, but I would say if Germany had it period, it probably would not have gone well, because like, even though they lost, right? It's like, even though you lose with atomic bombs, you're able to ensure that it's always a Pyrrhic victory for your enemies. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So pretty good that they ended up not succeeding at that, because I like London and Paris to exist, right? But anyway, so this group wrote a letter to FDR saying you should get started on a nuclear program. And yeah, when this group approached Einstein about the possibility of a nuclear bomb, he was like, I want to find the quote actually. Okay, yeah. So Szilard, which is the name of the guy, Szilard and Wagner visited Einstein to explain the possibility of atomic bombs, which Einstein, a pacifist, said he had never considered. Which is just like, wow. You've got pure wholesome right here. He's like, he just didn't even think of it, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, eventually they convince Einstein to put his name behind the letter. And that's where you get this political cartoon where Einstein's taking off the wings of non-resistant pacifism and in favor of preparedness. So that's a sort of interesting shift. It's sort of like the peace through strength argument. Like that's a Reagan quote, I think. So because there are two ways to be a pacifist, right? There's one saying just like, I oppose war at all costs, but then there's the other way of saying we should build up an arsenal so that other people won't attack us.
A certain
which is like
big stick, would you say?
Oh yeah, speak softly and carry a big stick. Yeah, it's an interesting debate, but with World War II, Einstein ended up deciding on supporting American nuclear efforts. So, yeah, interesting. I mean, that's like, I don't know, such a complex, all the nuclear debate, pretty interesting. But
yeah, that comes up a lot. That came up a lot, I should say, in my first and second year doing debate. My second year, I was with Jacob. Nukes came up so much. Like, usually we do a lot of technology debates, but I would say that they were the most like repetitive technology that we debated about besides social media. There's so many social media debates because of all the new law. But nukes are just like so insane, you know? Like, again, like two of them just ended World War II. One of the most insane wars of all time, and like insane wars.
Yeah,
like such a
deadliest war.
Yeah, deadliest war. Just, horrific, long lasting. Like, certainly was not over by Christmas, or was that the first one? It was the first one.
I think
Christmas?
That was World War One that they were saying about that. That was World War One.
But
they had no pretensions about the length of time it would take for World War II.
But it's, I don't know, man. It is like I had to write a couple of papers about it too in freshman year.
Yeah, I wrote a paper.
Yeah, about Truman's decision. Like, did he make the right decision?
Yeah.
All that kind of jazz.
Yeah, that was 8th grade. I did that in 8th grade.
Yeah.
I think I said he made the right decision. Personally, just based on what the alternative was, which was a ground invasion of Japan. But
yeah, it's hard to say. It really is.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I don't really know what to think, but
yeah,
for them, against them, no one is disagreeing that they're the most deadly weapons ever.
Yep.
But
then I would say that, in my opinion, I think the best answer to the whole nuclear problem is to figure out better defense mechanisms against nuclear bombs
Mm-hmm.
rather than trying to say stop building nuclear bombs, because the trend with every technology, right, is that it starts off as some expensive luxury item or some expensive military tool, and then everyone has one.
That's true.
So it's like, and basically, nuclear bombs are only going to get cheaper to produce over time. They're only going to get easier to make. And so that creates a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the better way to solve that problem is to say, let's like build a very good missile defense system. Because although, there's like the nuclear non-proliferation efforts, like the trying to scale back the arsenals. I think, it's commendable, but again, it's like it'll get smaller and smaller, smaller and smaller scale, because in during the Cold War, right, it's like the only people that had nukes were the two world superpowers, the largest like countries with the largest economies in the world. Those are the only two nations that had nukes. Now North Korea has nukes, and they are like a tiny country that's totally impoverished. How long until just like terrorist organizations can get their hands on nuclear bombs? Um, that's the problem, because at that point there is no reasoning with, like, there's no way to say, could you please non-proliferate, right? We at least have some say over North Korea, but it's so concerning because they're like kind of a rogue state. Um, and yeah, but just as the technology develops, as it gets cheaper, the problem is it'll take less and less individuals to decide to launch a nuclear attack. So we need to be able to have better defenses against it. But
Yeah.
anyway, so Einstein was in favor of the atomic research, uh, the American research. So, yeah. All right.
American
So in
citizenship.
1940, yeah, in 1940, Einstein becomes an American citizen. Uh, yeah, which is just this judge. He's just like a circuit judge in New Jersey. Like, I'd like, imagine being that guy. Like, oh, I get to administer Albert Einstein's citizenship, and like you can see, there's like a whole crowd of people. Like,
Yeah.
look, it's Albert Einstein. So, yeah, again, still just a celebrity, which is pretty interesting because most like famous people, whether it be like famous artists and musicians or famous scientists, tend not to be very recognized until after their deaths. So it's interesting how Einstein was very much like very popular. But yeah. So yeah. So Einstein, 1940. So for the last 15 years of his life, he was an
Mm-hmm.
American citizen, lived in America. Um, Still like teaching at colleges and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And also doing a fair bit
All
of
right.
social justice, which leads us to the next one.
Yeah, yeah. The next, yeah, the next slide. So Albert Einstein got involved in the civil rights movement. Uh, do you want to talk about it? I
Yeah,
think
sure.
did you do more research on it, or yeah?
Um, yeah. So a large part of why he decided to speak out against this is because he lived in America from or he was an American citizen from 1940 to his death, but he drew a very clear line between the suffering of the Jews and the suffering of African Americans, which was a very popular idea at the time. And
Yeah.
actually, I think we might actually touch more on that in our next episode, which will be on
Oh yeah.
music of the 1900s, because that
Yeah.
idea is popularized by a lot of jazz musicians, notably Louis Armstrong, who was actually raised by a Jewish family. But the struggle between the Jews and African Americans Einstein really held on to that idea that they were obviously different racially and had different ethnicities, but they were brothers because they had both suffered for so long. And
Yeah,
he,
that
yeah,
that is a very interesting point. I remember like reading this story about like this boxing match in the late 1930s between an African American and then a German boxer. I forget. This was such a long time ago. Like this was in like middle school that they told us about this story. But it was like that like match, like the American boxer won, and but then still faced discrimination, and it was sort of like a moment where a lot of people were like in America were like, wait a minute, what? Like this is incongruous with what we're trying to say about Germany, and that was a very big trend. Um, like that people sort of realized that like this is similar to what Germany's doing. So
yeah, absolutely. That's exactly where Einstein's mind was at too. Because I mean, as a Jewish scientist from Germany who lived through World War One and World War Two, that he faced an extreme amount of anti-Semitism. He faced anti-Semitism before he became famous and after he became famous, just because of world events. So he knew what it was like to be discriminated against solely on race, solely on
mm,
on ethnicity, um, and I think because of his own personal experience with that, he really empathized with African Americans in who were living in America during this time period because he saw that they were facing the same, unjust discrimination that he faced. And again, he is a or was a German citizen and saw Hitler rise to power. One
yeah,
of the most discriminatory people in history. He knew what he knew what that kind of discrimination looked like, and he knew how absolutely disenfranchising it could be for anyone if like racist ideals or just discriminatory ideas in general were able to proliferate. He knew exactly what that could turn into because he saw that in his own home country.
yeah. Um, Yeah, and another interesting point is that he worked with the civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois,
Mm-hmm.
or Du Bois. I don't know. Sounds French, so it's like hard to, that the Du Bois. I don't know if the S is silent, but
Dubois.
he's a major civil. Yeah, exactly. Major civil rights activist.
Mm-hmm.
Learned about him in history class, and so another interesting, like specific case was that Einstein said that he was going to testify on behalf of Du Bois in a trial in 1951. And I love this part of the story. When Einstein offered to be a character witness, the judge decided to drop the case, which is just like, because think about that, right? You're a judge and you're like, okay, so we've got this case, like civil rights activist, okay. And then Albert Einstein joined the chat. It's like, oh, uh, okay, have a nice day. Like,
Yeah.
like, what are you gonna do to that? What are you gonna
It's
do? The
like,
jury obviously,
yeah,
because like the jury obviously knows who Einstein is, so it's like you can't get a like, you can't find like a jury that doesn't know who Albert Einstein is. So you got to be
mm-hmm.
like if you're in the jury there, and you got to think like Albert Einstein says to you like, this is a good man. You're gonna be like, uh, okay. Like you're gonna trust Albert
Yeah,
Einstein,
you're
so
gonna
it's just
trust
like,
our eyes.
yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah,
but yeah, so he was yeah, I mean smart guy, really. Just
yeah,
forward thinking about all of these kinds of things. And obviously he was only there for the very early parts of the civil rights movement, like the roots of it that began in the early 50s to mid 50s. So he never got to see the success of the civil rights movement. He never got to see Martin Luther King Jr. in like full force. So that's a bit unfortunate, but I think he would have been pleased with MLK's
Yeah.
March on Washington and the Civil Rights Act that eventually got passed.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's about it for Albert Einstein. In 1955, at the age of 76, he suffered from internal bleeding and an aneurysm. So like this was after he had already had a surgery to correct it, and they were prepared to do surgery again, but this time he was like it is my time.
Yeah.
They have a quote, and like this is like the last quote attributed. He probably said something else before he died, but this is like the last quote they have, which is, "I want to go when I want. It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share. It is time to go. I will do it elegantly." So, yeah. Then he died. So, yeah.
Yeah. His final last words, like his final words, are unknown because he said them in German and his nurse didn't speak German.
Oh,
God damn
wow.
it, lady! Come on, man! Like you couldn't have just
Yeah, exactly.
written down kind
Could
of
have
what it
written it
sounded
down,
like.
or like, yeah, or you'd think like his family would be there. Like, was no one
Yeah,
else there? Just
honestly.
like, kind of like,
Where
I think
his like
Marie,
yeah,
or
or like his
because
previous
Lowenthal
16
died
lovers,
in
where were they
1936.
at? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Lowenthal died in 1936.
Yeah.
So she wouldn't have been there, but maybe, I don't know, Marique might have died before
Where was his
Einstein. I
son
have to
at
check
though?
that. But yeah. Well, okay, so this is another thing. One of his sons at the age of 20 was committed to a mental asylum because he had schizophrenia. But the other son was fine. Okay, yeah, Marique died in 1948. But then it's like, what about, I think it's Hans Albert Einstein, his son, we think, let's see.
Where was he at, man?
Yeah, what was he doing? What was he doing? Hmm.
Who knows? But
He was at Berkeley, so he's on the other side of the country. I don't know, because this was also a, I guess, relatively quick, sort of unexpected death a little bit, because it's like internal bleeding, aneurysm. Aneurysms are like, well, Sebastian has informed me of how frightening an aneurysm is medically, because like can't diagnose it before, and then it just suddenly just happens. Like, okay,
it's horrible.
Yeah, but yeah, he lived to be 76, so, and became like one of the most famous scientists of all time.
Yeah,
name synonymous with intelligence.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was gonna say, is that it's very rare to just. I mean, he is it for like physicists and just for intelligence in general. Like, people will always say like there will be a news story like, 8th grader shown to have the same IQ as Albert Einstein. Great. First of all, IQ is a horrible measure of intelligence. I absolutely refuse to use IQ as any measure of intelligence. I absolutely refuse it. But secondly, again, and again, this goes into the problem with IQ, is that it's based off of a lot of just like recall, like some pattern recognition and stuff like that. But you can never truly encapsulate like the thought pattern that you need to go to create incredible theories like Einstein did. Again, it wasn't strictly what he thought, it was the way he went about thinking. And, there will
Yeah.
probably never be another quote unquote Einstein. I'm sure in the future there will be someone to create a theory that will rival general relativity in the field of physics.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever a unifying field theory for physics is
Yeah.
created, that will be the one to kind of compete with general relativity, or just simply absorb it into the theory, I guess. But it is, he is the absolute master of his craft.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, that is another sort of interesting point, is that they did an autopsy on Albert Einstein, and the pathologist who was doing the autopsy, unauthorized, he had Einstein's brain removed for preservation, which is which was probably a good idea. I mean, I'm not going to be the guy that's in favor of unauthorized medical actions, but I just, because Albert Einstein was cremated and his ashes were spread in Trenton, New Jersey, and I'm just like,
his ashes were spread in Trenton, New Jersey?
Yeah.
What an insult. Jesus.
Well, he was cremated in Trenton.
Oh my god.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So he was cremated in Trenton. The ashes were at undisclosed location.
That's better than Trenton, New Jersey.
Yeah. Well, the location could have been Trenton. It's just undisclosed.
Let's hope not. But
he was a New Jerseyite. He lived in New Jersey for 20 years.
Yeah, I know.
Sebastian, not happy. Not happy about that.
I'm not happy, Max.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think they still have Albert Einstein's brain just preserved for study.
Yeah. But we can look at the
they haven't really found anything, but
it was his brain was slightly smaller than average, so people theorized that the nerve pathways might have been able to move faster, but not that doesn't have too much water to it.
Yeah.
So, it was just, who knows?
Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, here we have this chart that shows Albert Einstein's lifespan compared to different scientists that were around sort of the same time. And then on the bottom we have, so on the top we have the year. Each tick mark is 1 decade. And then at the bottom we have the different U.S. presidents at the time. So look at all these. Yeah.
And if it's,
you can just look at it. We'll just leave this up.
Yeah, I moved us out of the way too, so they can see it. But if they go off the screen, that doesn't mean that that's the year that they were either born or died. It just means it goes past the scale.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is interesting. Just the different scientists here. You got Robert Oppenheimer. Mm-hmm. I think they might have. I forgot if he said that. Did they ever communicate, Einstein and Oppenheimer? I think they may have.
That's a good question here. Oppenheimer. Einstein.
Oh, well, so Oppenheimer did speak at Einstein's memorial in 1965. The UN did a memorial for Albert Einstein in 1965. But yeah, I don't know how much they talk to each other.
So Robert Oppenheimer wrote a short piece posthumously about Einstein, and he says that it was only in the last decade of Einstein's life that they were close colleagues and something of friends. Okay.
So yeah, they kind of knew each other.
Wow. So Oppenheimer claims that late in Einstein's life, in connection with his despair over weapons and wars, Einstein said that if he had to live it over again, he would be a plumber.
Ooh.
He said it was half a joke, half serious.
Wow. Yeah,
But
exactly. Oof mode. Wow. That's crazy.
a little weird that
Yeah,
Max Planck could have met Stephen Hawking. Strange to think.
oh yeah. I don't think they did.
They
right?
probably
But
did, because Stephen
yeah, they
Hawking
did.
would have been like 5. But
6. So it's like,
yeah,
who knows? Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that is weird. Those sort of weird, like, yeah, like that is weird. Or like a 12-year-old Joe Biden could have met Albert Einstein.
yeah.
Like, that's interesting. Like a lot of modern political figures, because all the political figures are really old. But yeah. So it is interesting. Yeah. So now I'm a little curious what the J stands for in J. Robert Oppenheimer.
I
You
think
know, like,
I think it's Jerome.
I'm just gonna guess it's John. Jerome. Okay.
I thought
It
it
doesn't
was
like
Jerome.
immediately say. It doesn't. No, it doesn't say.
No.
Like, because usually on Wikipedia, when someone's name is like different from their birth name, it says what their birth name is. Okay, wait.
What does J
Robert
stand
Oppenheimer. Full name.
for? Julius.
Julius.
Yeah, it was Julius. Right. That's right.
Absolute savage.
Oh, and he also
Julius.
died in New Jersey, in Princeton.
Mm.
Interesting.
Huh. New Jersey is killing the world's best scientists. That's one conclusion. But
I you know what,
of course,
I support that hypothesis.
Theories. Yep.
I think it's wise.
Anyway, avoid New Jersey at all costs. Nah.
This is a threat. Avoid New Jersey.
Yep. Anyway, yeah, that's about it. So
Final
if you guys
thoughts.
want to continue to appreciate this chart, you can press pause.
Yes.
Anyway, final thoughts. Yeah, Albert Einstein, well-deserved, prolific figure.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, again, revolution in physics. Like, you can define sort of the study of physics as like before relativity and after relativity. Like, that's just, you can sort of define the different eras of physics. There's like Newtonian physics and then relativistic physics. You know, like those are like the two major branches of physics now. You know, like that's just sort of crazy to think about how fundamental this like categorization is. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
It is. He deserves every bit of credit that he has. It makes absolute sense that his name is synonymous with genius and intellect and all of that. It is because there's a lot of overrated historical figures. Sigmund Freud, but Albert Einstein is not one of them, not in the slightest.
Yeah,
and he's like he might have had some issues with adultery in his life, but he seemed to be a caring person. And character goes a really long way. And while it might not show up on paper or on other things, just it's a little comforting to know that the world's smartest man was also a kind guy.
Yeah.
It's a nice thought.
Well said. Yeah. But yeah, so with that, thank you all for watching. And thank you, Sebastian, for being my co-host as always.
As
We will
always.
see you guys next week for a pre-recorded episode because we're going to be on vacation for like 3 weeks. 3 weeks cumulatively.
Yeah.
So we're not that special that we get 3-week vacations, but cumulatively
Yeah, no, the
between the two
guys
of us, 3 total weeks of vacation.
the guys upstairs
So
don't allow us too many vacation days.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we here at the GarageMax live stream, we only get 2 weeks. We only it's not fun. We got to work 12-hour days, 6 days a week here at the GarageMax live stream. We tried to unionize, but there's only 2 of us, so like they're not listening. Anyway,
I haven't seen my
we'll see you
family
guys all
since
next
season 3.
time. Yep. Well, anyway, goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice day. Nice. Obligatory.
Obligatory.